Thanks for hanging out, folks. I know it's late. I'll try and be brief. I'll go into Jersey mode. First of all, thank you very much. And I just want to point out one thing. I agree with a lot of Christopher's book, but if you look at the tone of his book, if you had to sum it up in one phrase, it would be this: there is no God, and I hate him. Christopher calls himself an anti-theist. He's not an atheist, he's an anti-theist. The second major way of summarizing the book, I think, is this way: since religious people have done evil things, God doesn't exist. In logic, that's called a non sequitur. It doesn't follow. Of course we all do evil things. I do evil things. That doesn't mean God doesn't exist. In fact, I agree with Christopher on many things. I think many religious people have behaved terribly. I think many religious beliefs are false and can't be justified. I don't think you need to believe in God to know basic right and wrong or to be moral. I'm just saying that atheists can't justify morality. You don't need the Bible or any other religious book to know basic right and wrong. So I agree with Christopher on many of these things. But none of these things, or none of the things he's brought up today, no arguments, are really arguments against the existence of God. God could still exist even if all of Christopher's complaints and assertions are true. In fact, I've given evidence that God does exist, I think. Now, some of you may not be persuaded by that. That's okay. There's a difference between proof and persuasion. It's up to you whether you think it's persuasive. Also, the title of this book, God is not great, how religion poisons everything. Actually, religion doesn't poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. I admit it. And what Christopher does is he conflates all religions and say, because the Muslims are committing jihad, and the folks in Belfast are doing evil, and the folks in Baghdad are doing evil, and even Christians are doing evil, that means there's no truth in religion? Bad theology doesn't mean there isn't good theology. You can't conflate all religions and say that none of them are true just because people do evil things. I am a hypocrite. And when people say to me, I can't go to church because all those hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal, we got room for one more. That's what the church is. It's a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. I'll never be perfect. That's why Christ had to come. Now, as Christopher admits, his disbelief is really not in his head, but in his heart. It's not that there's no evidence for God, so that he can't believe. It's that despite the evidence, he won't believe. He says that he rebels against the divine dictatorship. He just mentioned that. He keeps calling God immoral and tyrannical. The problem for Christopher is that there's no immorality or tyranny if atheism's true. Atheism affords Christopher no objective moral standard by which to judge anything immoral or tyrannical, including all the sins of religious people, circumcision, sexual restrictions, the Crusades, suicide bombings. All you can say is these people had bad molecules. He has to borrow objective morality from the theistic worldview in order to argue against it. He has to assume God in order to deny him. He has to sit in God's lap to slap his face. Christopher is like the man in a restaurant who is eating a meal, and because he doesn't like the food, claims that the chef doesn't exist. This is a non sequitur. Now, I've tried to give evidence as to why I think theism better describes reality than atheism, because of the acronym I use, cosmos. Because all time, all matter, and all space exploded into being out of nothing. Because it exploded into existence with incredible order and extreme fine-tuning. Because life and the genetic code are the result of intelligence. Because there are objective immaterial moral values. Because objective immaterial realities such as reason, the laws of logic, and mathematics exist, which enable us to investigate the world through science in this orderly universe. And because a crucified man from an obscure village became the most influential person in human history through his resurrection from the dead. You know, Christopher hasn't given us any real reason to believe atheism is true or to describe reality. He's given no atheistic explanation for how things that we know exist, where they came from. No explanation for the universe, fine-tuning of life, the genetic code, morality, reason, math, science, and we can add human freedom to that if we want. Instead of evidence, Christopher has provided speculation, faith, and ignored the issues completely. That's why I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, and why theism, I think, better explains reality than atheism. I want to point out one other thing. We had a question a minute ago about the meaning of life. Christopher says in his book that the sacrifice of Christ is immoral. Again, using the language of morality. But is sacrifice really immoral? On September 29th, 2006, Petty Officer Michael Mansour was a U.S. Navy SEAL. He was serving in Ramadi in Iraq. Petty Officer Mansour had two teammates and had taken a position on the outcropping of a roof when an insurgent grenade bounced off his chest and landed on the roof. Mansour had a clear chance to escape, but he realized that the other two SEALs did not. In that terrible moment, he had two options. He could save himself or save his friends. For Petty Officer Mansour, this was no choice at all. He threw himself on the grenade and absorbed the blast with his body. He died 30 minutes later. One of the survivors put it this way: Mikey looked death in the face and that day and said, "You cannot take my brothers, I will go in their stead." When President Bush gave Petty Officer Mansour's Medal of Honor to his parents at a White House ceremony, he rightly said this: "Perhaps the greatest tribute to Mike's life is the way different service members all across the world responded to his death." Army soldiers in Ramadi hosted a memorial service for the valiant man who had fought beside them. Iraqi Army scouts, whom Mike helped train, lowered their flag and sent it to his parents. Then, nearly every SEAL on the West Coast turned out for Mike's funeral in California. I don't know if you know, but a SEAL has a trident. It's a pin. It is probably the most difficult pin in any military to earn. I have a pin, Navy wings. These were difficult to earn, but they were nothing like the SEAL or the trident that a SEAL needs to earn. When every SEAL on the West Coast turned out for Mike's funeral, they all filed past the casket. They removed their golden tridents from their uniforms, pressed them into the walls of the coffin. The procession went on for nearly half an hour, and when it was all over, the simple wooden coffin had become a gold-plated memorial to a hero who will never be forgotten. Now I ask you, is sacrifice immoral? Jesus said this: "The greatest love a person can show is to die for his friends." So while Christopher's attitude may be, "There is no God and I hate him," God's attitude is, "There is a Christopher Hitchens and I love him. In fact, I died for him."
And now, let us thank both of our speakers.